This is for ESRM 351 field methods. My name is Brenton Spies. I'm going to be teaching you how to survey a wetland, in this case Calleguas Creek, or some kind of water body, for mostly fishes today, but we should probably catch some invertebrates as well. The first thing I was going to go over is my gear. So I use a variety of different types of clothing when I go into the wetlands. This is almost like board short and booty type of conditions. No flow, really shallow, and it's hot outside. But I usually, with this kind of environment, you get a lot of invasive species. You'll get some poison oak, so I tend to usually wear some kind of covering. I like really cheap waders. I like the breathable waders. These are only like $60, $70, because the difference between this and like a $300 pair of nice Patagonia waders is not going to prevent any of these sticks from going through your waders. So I would just buy a cheap pair that fits you good, and then buy the repair kit for like 10 bucks, because I have repairs all over my waders. I usually replace these. I'm in there all the time, so I usually replace these probably once every year or so. And then I use just kind of surf booties. I like the ones, some of them have a lot more durability, so this is like a hard sole. And if you notice the bottoms, I'm gonna totally fall right now, but there's no felt on them. So a lot of booties or boots that you get will typically, they're called wading boots, have felt on the bottom. We don't want to use these at all for any kind of surveys, because the felt will grab onto various sea pods or snails or different invertebrates, and then you can transfer them from site to site. They're really hard to clean. So these are really easy to scrub. They have kind of big grooves on the bottom, so you can get traction and prevent you from slipping around, but then they're super easy to clean. I think that's it. I always have choose waders that have a pocket, because I always have my field notebook, and this is a bottle of ethanol just in case we get some critters that we want to take back to the lab and preserve. And then there's a little waterproof pouch underneath that I can keep my phone if needed. So that's my choice, but I encourage you to find waders that are comfortable rather than expensive. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to put out, these are called minnow traps, and you can buy these really cheap at any kind of, most sporting goods shops have them, where you can order them online for really cheap. I'll put one together in a second, but it's just kind of like a small lobster trap in a sense. One side has a really narrow hole that small fish, invertebrates, even sometimes amphibians can get through. And then we usually bait them with cat food. Super cheap, smelly. You just want something that smells really potent, has a lot of oil. So once we put this in, we usually let them soak for about 30 to 45 minutes. You don't want to have them sit out for a long time, because then you can start to get like snakes, garter snakes, things like that can swim in and they can drown. And I'll show you in a second how to deploy those, so in case you do catch one, there's a little air pocket for them. But we usually tend to, if there's fish in the area, giving them about 30-45 minutes will suffice. You have to, depending on what kind of fish you want to target, right? So if we want to catch small gobies, these are not usually the traps I use to catch gobies. I have ones that I've modified that are similar but have like a smaller mesh around them to prevent them from getting out. But this will let us catch things like crawdads or mosquito fish or anything larger that can fit in this hole. So I'm just going to deploy this one real fast. Usually I like to put these close to some kind of emergent vegetation for two reasons. A lot of times you can see right now there's just a ton of shade It's the middle of the day almost, so this water's starting to get hot. A lot of fish will start retreating into the reeds in general. You don't get a lot of fish that are going to be in these hot exposed shallows. And so I try to put it somewhere where I'm not going to forget where it's at, first of all, but it's easy to access. I can see some fish already swimming around right here. So I'm just going to plop it down kind of right here, right next to some emergent vegetation. It's got an open area over here for them to swim in. I can already see the oils. It looks like I spilled gasoline or something. There's all these oils from the cat food coming out. That's what you want. So it gets real stinky. And then I'll just get this little string and tie it around just to secure it. Okay? If you're in an area that is like high flow, then you probably have to worry about securing it a little bit more than I am right now, but there's basically no flow here. One thing that we want to do, you can see that I didn't put the trap all the way underwater. So there are water snakes, garter snakes, even rattlesnakes often will cruise through these watery areas. If they got in there, they would drown if it was completely submerged. So we tend to, you could probably put it a little bit deeper if you wanted, but you want to try to keep at least like a third of it on the top that's open and exposed to the air. And then we'll just leave that for 30-45 minutes. I'll tend to put some kind of flag. I'll come back in a second and do that. Like a flag. Or flagging tape that's like bright yellow or something like that, just so or orange, just so I know where it's at. And these things are super easy to put together. There's just two sides. They're basically the same. There's one side that has like a male female kind of lip to it, and then there's this side that you put the lock on. So you fill it up with all your cat food. These will overlap each other, so they kind of form a hinge, right? And then fill it up with cat food, and they just have these little locking beaners that you, carabiners that you just feed through, match these up, and click it in. And you got yourself a quick trap. And these are actually kind of meant to be quick release too, because if you do catch hundreds of mosquito fish, which you might do, you can quickly get it out and like put them in a bucket if you wanted to survey them. So that's how we do fish traps. Oh, we got different fish in here too. You see all of them?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, we're we're 60 off the
There's two different ways that I usually tag, but you can do whatever you want, as long as it's bright and easy to see. First thing, with a lot of emergent vegetation, I'll just bring some flagging tape, and this could actually even be for two of them. This stuff stretches really easily, so you can put it up, kind of easy to see, so that way, you know, imagine going through a whole kind of creek or something like that and putting like 20 or 30 of these out. You might forget kind of one or two of them, so you want to make sure you do this. And ideally, if you did that, you would have some kind of GPS on you or tracking device that you would put waypoints at each one of these. The other ones that I use, if I have like an area that I easy to access my vehicle, and I don't have to pack in, I'll bring these flagging, or these flags. So if I have to pack in and I want to utilize space, I'll bring tape, and with these are really easy. We'll put these over here. All these fishes. A little bit easier to see in cool. So all of our traps are placed. So this hunk of metal is called a push net, one-man push net. I made this for my master's degree because I was out surveying. I knew by myself a lot, but I had to have some kind of custom net that would go through emergent vegetation or algae just like this, because that's where larval gobies like to hang out. They like to hang out under the canopy. You can see how this mesh is a lot finer than the other fish mesh that I had, and so that's meant for gobies. You can also see that I've tied it multiple times. Since this net does go through vegetation a lot, it'll break the net and you have to retie it a bunch, but that's okay. This is made out of a solid aluminum tubing, so it's heavy. It's one of the downsides to this, but it does really well, and it's meant for this thick emergent vegetation or algae. You can get even like through thick grass like this, where the seine net doesn't. The seine net, if you go through this kind of veg, the bottom where the weights are will roll up, and it'll keep rolling to the point where it'll just let all the fish out underneath it. So this you could do, it depends on the type of substrate. Sometimes you're able to just push it like a lawnmower, which in this case we can't because of the sediment, it's sucking it up. So you just grab it like this, just give it a little lift, and you'll see how it just mows over. You see all these tadpoles just scattering out right now. It just mows over this veg, and it won't kill it, it's just pushing it down. So we're able to get some really good surveys in this thick veg. You can also see that since the mesh is really fine, we're going to collect all of that vegetation and mud. So even though it does a really good job at collecting fish in this environment, it takes a little bit more time to process, right? So we'll bring it over here to the shore. Keep it wet. Put it over here just to see what's in there. A lot of times I'll put it on this tarp. The tarp helps to kind of keep some water underneath, just to keep your samples cool. What I usually do with this is all this veg, I'll give it a shake, and then we want to make sure to return this back to the water because there's tons of critters, and this is habitat for a lot of different animals. So I'll just do that with all of these plants I got. Just give it a shake. Most of the large fish will fall out. And so we got larger tadpoles now.
Ooh, that's a big one.
Yeah. See how the tarp kind of holds some water in so you can get your hands wet? One of the other things I like to do, I'll put him away, but I always have a bucket full of water ready to go. So if you think it's gonna take you some time to process, that way you can go through. I got a tadpole, right? Put him in the bucket. I got another tadpole, put him in the bucket. This is tadpole central. So in this case, right now able to not really stress out about killing them or not, but then I can also go back and get an accurate count. All of this algae, I'm not sure, I think this is all native. Make sure to throw it back. It's got tons of aquatic insects in it. We'll just go through real fast. Wow, we got like the whole tadpole population in here. And you can see how good this net is, right? Where it's going to take you a little time to process more tadpoles. But we likely wouldn't have gotten this many tadpoles if we used a net, because by the time it got to even just this algae, it would have started rolling up on us and let most of these go. So I'm actually just going to let most of all of these. Wow. So this tadpole, this can't be a Pacific tree frog, because Pacific tree frogs fully grown are like half the size of this head. So this is a bullfrog tadpole. This is invasive. So it's all hard to tell. I think some of these are actually Pacific tree frogs that are swimming in here, that are smaller ones. They could be small bullfrog tadpoles, some of them, but that's definitely a bullfrog tadpole. You can see some feet starting to come out on the back. We'll let him go though, because I'm not sure. I'm not positive on the ID. So I'll quickly go through these. Tons of just aquatic mussels, bivalves, even this is a super small. This is another dragonfly larvae, different stage, smaller. Seeing if we got any fish in here, I'm sure. Oh, got a crawfish. Some of these we're actually going to preserve just so we have records of them. Another crawfish. And I might have missed some, but I just want to get all these tadpoles back in the water. Lots of bivalves. So this is another thing too with this type of survey, is you can see how I'm getting all these bivalves which are in the sediment. When you have that thick aluminum tubing going through, it's not just going through the veg, but it's going through that top layer of the sediment and stirring it up. The net does that a little bit, but this does a really good job. So you can also get a good idea of what the benthic and fauna looks like. So that's using a one-man push net. Alright, so the first method we're going to use with nets is called a seine net. These, I get them made by a company called Memphis Net and Twine, which is really great. All of their metrics are in feet. Okay, so this is a 6-foot net. A lot of times, if you read kind of papers on methods, you'll see that seine nets are all these kind of weird lengths and sizes, and that's because they have to convert them from feet to meters. That's just how these companies work. This is a 6-foot net. It's probably 6 foot by 5 foot, I think is what it is. I use these solid wood rods that you can get at Home Depot for all of my nets. You don't want to get, sometimes people use like broomsticks or a lot thinner material, but you can see these won't bend. These are really solid. So imagine having a lot of weight from vegetation or sediment or just fishes. You don't want something that's going to bend when you lift it up. Okay? Seine nets, this is a really small one for a very specific purpose, but they're all meant to be constructed the same way. The bottom is a lead line. You can see all these lead weights that are strung in along the bottom. And then the top has these floating buoys. So if you, when you're kind of going through, this is for a single use. So if you're out in the field, it's always great to have a buddy, but if you have to pull a net by yourself, the weight line always goes on the ground, so that's going to scrape the bottom. And then if you are in really deep water, these buoys will keep it propped up, so you get the whole kind of water body. Whatever you skim through, it'll collect. I use this when I'm kind of targeting vegetation, or where we just put the fish trap, where a lot of these fish retreat. And so what I do is I kind of roll up the sides just so there's a little overlap, right? But I can put this under my armpits, and now I have a one-man push net. Okay, you can do this even with a really long. It's a little bit more uncomfortable, but if you have a really long net, if you roll it up, you can roll it up so it's about this size, and you can do what we call spot surveys. So we're just it's hard to quantify pushing nets like this, right, size-wise. But if you're interested in finding out what species are in certain places, we can spot net use in this. Before you actually start pulling and pushing these nets, you want to kind of give a good overview of where you think you're going to be pulling your net up, right? So typically we like to go upstream, right? So you want the flow to be pushing your net so it kind of keeps a good form. You don't want your net to be completely straight like this, right? Because then you won't have a big pocket for the fish to get stuck in. So you want to kind of, when you are pushing, you want to have some kind of a loop or bucket, so that way the fish can swim and get trapped in there. And I'm already, actually, it looks like I'm catching some fish. Pull up, I'm good for now. But you also want to think about where you're going to be pulling up. Right now it's not critical that I go upstream because there's no flow. And there's a really large fish right there. It looks like a carp. So I can go up, I can push upstream right now, but if I did do that, I have all this emergent vegetation that I'm going to have to pull my net up in. And it's going to be really difficult to land all those fish because they're just going to keep going deeper and deeper into the veg. And then I don't have anywhere to put my fish, right? I'm just going to be stuck in a bunch of reeds. So the best option for me would probably be to start up a little bit, come through the reeds, and then pull up on this nice flat beach, okay? So I'm just going to do a quick little pass right here. And sometimes you can just do like these loops too. So I can push up like this, right? Keep this little bucket shape so all the fish are going to swim in. I'm going to go in this emergent veg. I'm going to try to trap some of them. Sometimes I'll get one of my sticks, the one closest to the veg, and I'll kind of agitate it a little bit, try to scare some stuff out. And then just go around the edges. If you're looking for a good arm trap workout, this is great for the arms. Definitely tire you out. And then you have all this veg right here. I'm going to try to get under that. Try to scoop up everything that's in there, pull it up. We already got some fish. Success. Alright? So when you put it down, these fish, they can stay out of water for a couple minutes. No worries. You want to be careful about where you're putting your knees. You don't want to squish anything. But we have, this is an invasive fish. It's called the green sunfish. Highly invasive. It eats a lot of fish. So we'll put him up here for now. I saw a little sculpin-like fish in here somewhere. Oh, it's actually not a sculpin. It's a tadpole. Good thing with this, you can see how I wetted my hands first. If you're going to touch any of these, you want to make sure to wet your hands. This is a frog tadpole. It looks like a Pacific tree frog tadpole. We'll let him go, or her. And then you just have all these cool aquatic insects, which this is a type of freshwater beetle. I'm blanking on the name, but it's native. You have this odd looking alien critter, which is a dragonfly larvae. So you have all these kind of cool things, and so you can see how we didn't get a ton of stuff because our net wasn't that big. And there's a kind of cool spider cruising around right there, which I'm not sure on the name. But we're able to spot survey, right? So at least we know in this site that we have tadpoles and invasive green sunfish present. So that's one way that you could do fish surveys on your own. All right, so this is our next method. It's just a bigger version of the net that I showed you before. And so again, we could roll this up and kind of use it the way that I did over in the veg. But this is getting to the point where this is like a two-man seine net, two-woman seine net. Man-woman seine net. But there's a lot of people that I've seen over the years where it's, you know, you plan on going out and surveying, and maybe someone gets sick, someone's late, whatever, and they call it off because they don't have one person for the other side. And don't let that hold you up. There is a way, and I use this method all the time, to do it by yourself. And so what I do is, on one end, I just drilled some holes in my wood stick, the wood rod. I think it's just a curtain rod at Home Depot. And then I just put a piece of rebar through it. You can see I kind of offset it so there's a bunch hanging down. This I'm going to mount or just push in and secure in the sediment. Okay, you want to have it so, imagine you want to pull your seine up outside, right? You don't want the seine to still be in the water so fish can get out. So I'm gonna secure this slightly above the water line. Now, one of the things that I found, like when I first started doing this, you think you want to mount it like this, right? But if I end up coming around, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do like a big loop. If I pull this around to the other side, right, I don't want my secure line to be straight up and down. It's going to be hard to actually scoop the fish up. So you want to at actually a pretty significant angle. I'd probably say like at a 30, less than 45 degree angle. Because that's kind of, imagine that's how you would be pulling it up when you do your surveys. Now we can actually do a standardized seine haul. Usually when we do seines, you know the distance of your seine, and then you would go out and measure, you know, say we go out 5 meters and we pull 5 meters in, and then we have the size of the net. We can actually calculate the water body that we just sampled and how many fish we sampled in that water body. Difficult to do when you're doing these one-man push methods. But we can do that with this, right? I know the distance of this, and it's just going to be kind of the diameter, right? I'm going to do a full rotation, so it'd be the diameter of this loop in the case. So I'm going to pull this out just outside the vegetation so it doesn't start off by getting clumped up. Kind of set your net up for success. And then I'm just going to do a big loop. Okay? And you want to keep some tension on it so the net pulls with you. And I'm kind of actually looking at where it's overlapping with the vegetation so it doesn't clump. I can see all of these animals retreating. You can see how it actually forms this really nice bucket. The floats are keeping it up, so I'm not losing any fish. And it's secure, right? So I can do an actual standard, lots of fish just swim in it. It's awesome. I'm going to bring this up underneath here. And the one thing you have to be cautious about is when you pull this up, all the water is going to want to flush to that side, right? You're pulling it up, so just be careful. You have to do everything real gently. Now all of a sudden we just collected a bunch of stuff. So we'll quickly go through this. We got some more crawdads. Got some more tadpoles. I saw one fish here, which doesn't shock me, but it's the first time I've seen one this small, which is a baby largemouth bass.
Cute.
And this is a mosquito fish. So these are all invasive species. I think pretty much everything we just caught, the crawdads, the bullfrogs, the bass, mosquito fish, are all invasive species in here. But you can see how it caught a wide variety of fauna and even stirred up the bottom, right? So we were able to get some snails, some baby. This is a baby tadpole, another really small dragonfly larvae, another bivalve, right? So able to get a selection of fauna using that method, right? And I was able to do that myself. You want to be careful. I wouldn't do it with a net too much bigger than this, because then it gets really difficult to kind of control the side that is being anchored. So even though it's a bigger net, like you'll see in a second, we'll have an even longer net that's about double the size. It's almost impossible to do that one man, because it'll just start clumping up and it's really hard to keep the net taut. But another way that you can survey by yourself. This edge, just roll it, and whenever I get, when it's completely tight, we'll just try to push it in as much as we can. Let's see. There we go.
Can I push it down now?
Yeah, try to get it down as far as you can. Cool. Now we'll just do the other one from there.
Sit down.
This is how to bias your sample, students. All right. Okay. Cool. So this is one of the most common ways that we do large-scale fish surveys in lagoons and streams, and these are called barrier nets. So these are really long. You can use this as a traditional seine net if you want, or a beach seine. It takes kind of a whole crew to pull it, these large ones. But we generally will use these to create this massive barrier where all the fish in here cannot get out. And then we'll do repeated seine hauls using a smaller net to make sure that we catch every single fish that is in this general area. A lot of times if you're just pulling a seine net, like we're gonna do, you might miss some fish, or a fish might swim underneath. So if you really want to characterize a site really well, you have to do these repeat seine hauls without the fish moving away from the area, right? So we're gonna do kind of a 2-person seine, social distancing. This is this 6-foot net, I believe. This is 15 or 20 feet, 15 feet. So one thing, like I said before, if we pull this tight and we pull the net like this, the fish could easily swim out, right? There's no kind of bucket or catchment for the fish. So we want to move just a little, maybe a foot closer, still social distancing. And now all of a sudden when we start pulling, it'll create this big net, or this big catchment where the fish swim in and aren't able to get out. You want to make sure that your pulls are at about a 45-degree angle, so you don't want to go like this, and you also don't want to go like this, right? Because then the fish can easily jump over. So you want to keep it at like a 45-degree angle. You always want to have contact with the bottom. So what we usually do is when we're walking, we want to make sure that we're going at the same pace, and I just tap the bottom. So that way it's not like getting stuck on anything. It also allows me to, if this was like murky water, I would be able to like, oh, there's a rock here. We don't want to go over that rock. Or, oh, there's a branch. This is really clear water, so it's nice. You can see how there's like this cloud. Maybe you can't see, but there's a cloud. So that that weighted line is doing its job. And then we have a target over here that we're gonna shoot to. It's this tarp, we'll show you in a second. Still maintaining that kind of catchment distance. And I think we're out of the shot. So we'll just pull it up, see what we catch. You just keep going until there's no water in. Just keep going, keep going. We'll put it down a little bit, like angle it, yeah, perfect. And then that's a lot of mud. That's okay. Let me just sift this out. It's actually probably good to talk about anyways.
You're still recording?
Ready? Mm-hmm. Cool. So we just pulled this up to this tarp area that we have. You always want to make sure that you have some kind of target zone, which is usually a flat, sandy beach. And we put this tarp down just for 2 reasons. One, it kind of flattens the whole area so you have a workable area. But then if anything falls through this mesh, it'll be caught on the other side. So we can do kind of like a quick check afterwards, and they keeps it wet, right? So they won't dry out. One of the things when you're pulling these nets is sometimes, depending on the sediment, you'll catch a bunch of muck, right? And it just gets collected. I usually will just sit in the creek like this and just sift through this real quickly just to get as much of that out as possible. This is why having help in the field is always welcome to do this. And it's also want to make sure that the fish in here are not that stressed. Look at all of these tadpoles. there's probably about 50 small tadpoles that are about the size.
Oh yeah.
Super small. So that way when we're doing these kind of standardized, if you worked for the RCD, if you worked for U.S. Fish and Wildlife, National Parks, they all do this. We're able to easily characterize all the fish that are in here, and we'll do repeat surveys. When you do that, you clearly don't want to do what I just did and put stuff back in the water, right? Because then we're going to double count. So that's why we have some buckets up here. We're not going to go through a full survey today, but we have some buckets that we would put everything alive in. Usually we'd have an air stone so it keeps air circulating, or we could change the water if it gets too hot. And then we would keep doing seines. Usually we'll keep going until we get 2 negative seine hauls in a row. So say if Emily and I did 5 seines, we even got 1 mosquito fish in one of them, we would keep going until we got 2 negatives. If we got a negative and then we got a positive, we would have to start all over again. And we would keep going until we got 2 negatives. Lots and lots of tadpoles. I thought there was some fish in here, but the mud might be blocking some of that. This is definitely a field job that you have to be okay getting muddy and wet.
Would you have to pull out every single tadpole?
If we were doing a if we were doing a standardized test, we would pull out every single one. We'd put it in the bucket, and there would be some people counting. That's usually like the people that I know that do some of the largest surveys like this is the RCD. They do really thorough surveys of Malibu, especially since the restoration. And they usually have a group of like 10 or 15 people out there at least doing this. So that way you can get really quick, fast counts, accurate counts, but the animals aren't staying in the buckets for too long and they get them back out as quick as possible. I'm just gonna get these animals back in and we can try one more seine haul.
See if we get fish.
Just to see if we can get some fish. Cool spider. Lots of aquatic spiders that are around here. And I am not a spider guy, but this is a size I'm okay with. Once they start getting about the size of my hand and hairy, I am walking the other direction. Cool. Yeah, that's a good thing now. So, trying to bias these surveys a little bit. So with yours, try to get slightly under that. Perfect, yeah. And then we'll do the same thing. We'll just go slightly faster so we don't have enough time. Perfect. So then go around and just get that tip right in like the side of the vegetation. It's like come around, perfect. Cool. I'm gonna try to get a little less sediment. We can even just go back and forth a couple times. Yeah, get better.
Fun. Tadpole.
Cool. So, tadpole.
No fishies.
Little mosquito fish. They got away from us again. Mosquito fish. Tab. Bummer. So this is why you keep going until you miss. Sometimes if you have these really productive areas, got this cool bivalve though, you could spend a good 3-4 hours just doing one of these areas if you keep getting, you know, fish here and there. It's real difficult. We might have a little too small of a seine net, given the surface area, so it might have been, if we were really doing this for scientific purposes, we might have a slightly bigger net that takes up kind of the majority of this. But this is how you do kind of barrier net surveys in these large lagoons. Now I want to figure out what those guys are. One thing I was worried about. But yeah, these are all largemouth bass.
Tadpoles. Cradas.
Mosquito fish. Dragonfly larvae. This is one way too, if you don't have a water quality probe on you. If you get dragonfly larvae, you know it's fresh water, almost fresh water, because dragonfly larvae don't even like
Slightly salty.
3 to 5 parts. They like it 0 to 2, so it's a good indicator of fresh water. This is actually, we can do this too. You can see by doing a barrier net this way, right, the narrowest point is where we're starting, and so it's easier for fish to get out if it gets larger. So if we do want to target, say, a few fish, say we're getting everything in here, but there's this one school of fish that can move really fast, which is the ones that we can't really find. It might make more sense for us to scare them into this really narrow back part and see if we can get a few that way. So we're not biasing our samples now because we're characterizing this area, right? So as long as they're in this area, we're not biasing our samples. We can try to scare, they're probably hiding in this net too. I can see a few of them back there. Now they're swimming away from me. Mosquito fish. They got away from me again.
Disappointment. Oh no!
Let's see if I can scare them into this vegetation. Yeah. So it looks like they must be green sunfish. Which I guess the shape is right. It looks like they're the ones that I was thinking of are slightly lighter. That could be the sun. Yeah, it could be them. Highly invasive. These, they can get slightly bigger than this, but they don't get too big. But this is one of the main reasons tidewater gobies have been extirpated from a number of sites, including the Santa Clara River at one point, San Onofre Lagoon down in San Diego. So they love eating gobies or that like size range of fishes. And they're gonna go home with me. All right. Real quick, when you're using these nets, I always take them home and do a good cleaning, and depending on where I'm at, if I know it's infected with something invasive, I'll usually freeze it. You're supposed to freeze it for about 8 hours, so I'll take these nets off, either put them in my home freezer. I got like one of the chest freezers, thank you. Or we have a big freezer at the university. But before I do that, I want to try to get all of this vegetation and invertebrates off, right? Some of it's still native and we want to make sure not to remove it. So I'll just flip this over, bring it into the water, and I just kind of shake it out. So you bring it to the surface. That surface tension will pull a lot of that stuff out. And just start rolling it up. Make sure that it's straight on, doesn't get clumped up too much. Now I got like a new layer, right? So I'll use the surface tension to clean it off. It is, you know, a lot of times you'll probably have a partner that you can use. You can do both sides and it goes more efficiently, but you should learn how to clean all this stuff by yourself. And take care of your gear. I've had these nets for 12 years now and they're still in really good condition, but they can easily be degraded if you don't take good care of them. So once it gets to this side, right now I just got a bunch of more material. I'll flip it back over. And that way, most of the aquatic vegetation and inverts are back home, and we can take this and clean it later on. Alright, so we're going to check our first fish trap. I think it's been out for about an hour now. I always will untie it first.
What knot was that?
That was just an overhand slip knot, so quick release knot. But I did that because there's really no flow and it wasn't going to get washed away. Thank you for asking that.
You're welcome.
But if it was like a flow, like if you actually had a flowing stream or whatever, I would have used a fastener. I probably wouldn't have fastened it to vegetation that can easily bend, right? So I probably would have wanted these to have a more secure stem or something like that. So you just quickly lift up. You can see how the cat food has gotten real soft.
It's gross.
And
Nothing.
I don't see anything. So unsuccessful try. This is why a lot of times when you want to use these, you put a lot of them out. Actually, I'm kind of worried. I lent these out to someone to do red-legged frog surveys, and they opened up the hole a little bit larger than it used to be, so they could have just swam out. But this stuff is all, you know, it'll easily break down. A lot of fish and inverts will eat it, so I don't feel bad about dumping this out and leaving it. I'm sure a lot of the local raccoons and skunks will like it too. Make sure you grab your tape if you don't want to litter. We'll use this. I've reused this little piece of tape for probably like 2 years now. All right, let's check these. I think that these are all large. We got a large tadpole in there.
Oh yeah.
One. Quick release. One bullfrog. Oh, there was one mosquito fish. It just fell out. Yeah. And that's it. I think the hole might be too big because there's so many of them around. Or they just don't like this flavor cat food, which I think the extra stinky salmon is quite tasty. Let's try this one. This one I didn't put a knot in. Nada. So not as successful as the other methods, but it could have been for a variety of reasons. Maybe we didn't soak it long enough, which I don't think is the case. Maybe this hole was slightly too big given the fish that are around. Most of the tadpoles and the mosquito fish that usually like this stinky stuff can easily swim through this big hole. So we might need to, like, if we wanted to target those more, we might have to put some finer mesh in or let them soak more. By soaking, we mean just sitting out for longer periods of time. But kind of just an important reason why we try so many different methods to get accurate assessments of this community. Cool, so at the very end of the day, or in between sites, a lot of times when I'm out surveying, I'll survey a few sites in a day. It's really important to not cross-contaminate sites. Some sites could be really close to one another, and one could have like the New Zealand mud snail or zebra clam or quagga or whatever, and one doesn't. So that's why I actually have a variety of nets in here, so I could do like four or five sites a day, and I'm pretty strategic about which nets I'll use at which place, just so I could, you know, do a few at a time and I don't use the same net in different habitats. But at the end of the day, I actually have in the back, I have this whole tub that's full. I have 3 different pairs of waders and I have 3 different wetsuits, and so I'll use one at each site, and in between sites I carry this tub, and so I'll just pull this tub out. And a really good friend of mine who is an active, he's in the Air Force, gave me this massive camelback that is meant for holding, I think, 2 gallons of water. So when I'm out in the field, this is my shower. But you can also, I'll just fill this tub up with not a ton of water, but just enough to do a scrub. You can also, while I'm letting that fill, I have just like jugs of water that I'll use to rinse everything off before I put it in here. So for the purpose of today, I think this is actually enough. We'll close that off. And if you're out in the field for a while, I usually will look. I'm kind of familiar now with all the state parks, but if you're not and you're doing like a coastwide survey or something, figure out where your state parks are, because you can easily fill up water and stuff there while you go. There's a few different methods of cleaning. Like I said before, the best method is to freeze if you can. But I use this, it's called Pro Quaternary. It's all-purpose disinfectant, Clorox. This is one of the chemicals recommended by Fish and Wildlife that we use. And you don't need to use too much. I'll just give it kind of like a splash like that. And before I rinse my gear in here, you can see how my boots are covered. I'll get just a water jug and I just give it a rinse and get all that sediment off, right? So I just did that, and you can still see all these like inside the grains and the pads of the boot, right? Just imagine if this was a felt sole, it would still just be covered. I have a couple different scrub brushes. I actually use this for my water probe, so I can get into like the PVC tubing. This is what I use on my gear, and you just want to make sure you get everything out. And there are a ton of invasive snails that are so small you think they're just a grain of sand. And set it up real good. And make sure to get like the zippers and stuff, all these places that snails would love to hitch a ride. And I'll leave it in there. Okay, so I'll do all of these in between sites, and then I'll leave it in here for a few hours. So the next site, I'll use a new pair of boots, I'll use a new pair of waders that have been disinfected, and by the time I need a new pair, after I've gone through all my pairs of waders and wetsuits and all that stuff, these have been soaking in here for 8 hours or more, maybe even 12 hours or overnight. So this is a really good protocol to build into your survey methods. It's really important, especially in California wetlands and waterways. We have lots of invasive species. So all of that. This, what I usually do is, there's not a lot of crevices. I'll still give it a light scrub, especially where the boots were. But what I do with this, and actually probably what I'll do today, is I'll just dump all of this, because this, if I'm driving around, this will just splash around, right? So after I give everything a good scrub, I'll fill this bucket up so everything is submerged in there. I'll put a lid on it, and that way when I'm driving around my truck, it'll splish and then kind of cover everything, give everything a nice coat while it's soaking for a few hours. So yeah, it's kind of expensive. A lot of these wetsuits and stuff I've acquired over the years through grants and stuff like that, but all the more reason to get cheap stuff and get a few of them, get those repair repair glue and the patches. All my brushes, I just washed all this stuff, like, so a lot of those snails and stuff could be in the bristles. You want to make sure to put that in here, and now you're disinfected.